afternoon. My name is Navdeep Manaktala, and welcome to the very pertinent session today on tech startups navigating through uncertain times. These are clearly unprecedented times, to say the least. This isn't business as usual, and it's a time of great stress and uncertainty. I'm sure there's a lot playing on all our minds today, be it in terms of business continuity, well-being, communication, culture, and not least the impact on our businesses. Uh, as was just mentioned, to address this, we have the privilege today of having a select set of seasoned, and if I may use the term, battle-hardened entrepreneurs and investors who've successfully navigated their own way, their team's way, and organizations through their fair share of challenging and uncertain times. While there is no instruction manual to deal with a time like this, we look forward to drawing down today on their experiences and thoughts so that we can formulate our own strategies of dealing with the current situation. Towards this end, in this session, we have three panels. The first one talks about how to navigate the impact of business. The second one is about culture, communication, and well-being. And the third one is about ensuring survival and business continuity. While we have the panels with the very accomplished speakers today, a few quick thoughts from my side. One is that you're all leaders. And in a time like this, as leaders, there are three things that you should essentially watch out for, in my view. One is your leadership. Second is the safety and well-being of your teams. And the third one is business continuity. Your teams and colleagues and partners are looking at you and picking up signals so as to act with confidence. So that's number one. On the second one is communication. Essentially, four tenets I would recommend. One is make communication caring, irrespective of who you're reaching out to, be it customers, be it partners, be it colleagues. Second, try to make it as factual as possible, right? Avoid speculation, no predictions. Third one is try to make it as transparent as possible. Share as much as you know. And the last one is make it hopeful. I think that's super important in the context that we're living in today. And the last one from my recommendation from my side would be act immediately. It's okay to overreact versus under-reacting, especially when it comes to the well-being of our teams and the safety of our teams. And finally, before we go, a big shout out as usual to Shraddha and team YourStory for organizing this. As always, they have the startup community's best interest front and center. And also a big thank you to all the panelists for making time for the session today. So thank you again, and hope you will find the session useful. Stay safe.
Thank you so much. I want to begin by first of all thanking Navdeep, the entire Amazon Web Services team, as well as the Your Story team to organize this panel. And I also want to thank all the panelists who I'm going to introduce in a minute. But just to echo what Navdeep said, clearly these are difficult times, and I guess even more than difficult, these are uncertain times. In many ways, you all wish that you could rewind the clock by a month maybe, and that this were never to happen. As captains of your individual ships, you are the ones chartered with navigating this fog today. In an environment where you don't know how intense or how long the storm is going to be. So clearly, these are going to be tough times. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name is Alok. I'm a partner with Stellaris Venture Partners, which is an early stage venture fund. I've been doing this for 7 years, prior to which I spent 10 years as an operating guy in the software space. Used to be the chief operating officer for SAP in India and spent a variety of leadership roles with SAP and Siebel prior to that. Strategy consultant and a software developer in my past life. Let me take the honor of actually introducing all our panelists pretty quickly. We have, first of all, Ashish Kashyap, who is the founder and CEO of IND Wealth, which is a tech-based wealth platform. He was the founder and CEO of GoIBibo in Redbus, which was one of the pioneers in the online travel space in India, and was acquired by Make My Trip in 2016. He was also the country head of Google, and prior to which he was the head of e-commerce for India Times. Welcome, Ashish.
Thank you.
We also have Pankaj Bansal. Pankaj is the founder and CEO of People Strong, which is a very well-known and leading HR tech company in Asia. Prior to which he was part of the founding team of Altron's BPO division, which was essentially Hughes Software or Addison, as many of the people might know it for. Pankaj is also an avid angel investor. Welcome, Pankaj. And lastly, we have Pete Yamasaki. Pete is the regional vice president for Asia Pacific for Dhruva, and in his role, therefore, he leads all the sales and business activities for Dhruva in the Asia Pacific region. Dhruva, as actually all of you should know, is one of the most well-known SaaS startups from India and is in the business of transforming enterprise data protection and information management in the cloud world. Prior to Dhruva, Pete has spent time in various leadership roles across both startups and very large companies. In particular, he used to be a business development executive for Cisco in his past life as well. Welcome, Pete, as well. And gentlemen, thank you so much for taking out the time. So let's get started. I think, again, just to give some context to people, we have two founders on the call who actually founded their companies prior to the 2008 downturn. So this is clearly not the first situation they are seeing. And again, I'm not suggesting that these two situations are same, but sometimes there are certainly parallels to be drawn between different situations. And Pete has been around the block for a long time across various companies, across various geographies as well. So I'm going to begin with Ashish and Pankaj first. Given that you both started companies prior to 2008 downturn, I'm curious to know that when that downturn happened, what were your initial reactions? What were your guesstimates, if I may use the word, on the impact that that downturn was going to have on your business? And what did you find out? What difference you found between what you thought versus what really happened? And maybe I'll begin with Ashish.
Alok, thanks for the lovely introduction. And as you rightly said, the current situation is unprecedented. I don't see that it is mimicking the 2008 crisis, but I can still walk you through, what exactly happened. We haven't actually talked much about it, but I would use this opportunity to actually share the anecdote of how it worked. I think, I suppose at that time you were with Helion, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Well, I was actually with SAP at that point.
Okay, got it. It's interesting because we were on the ground level of the building where Helion also occupied an office, and it was a very expensive real estate for that time. And we were backed by very robust investors, which is Naspers and Tencent. They'd given us seed funding to essentially what we called at that point of time like an incubator to try and build multiple businesses and to somewhat mimic what perhaps Tencent has done in China. So we did some social media stuff, we did gaming, we also did some vertical search, we incubated various teams. But when this downturn happened, even the most robust of the folks started kind of receding. And what we at this time really decided, which turned out to be an opportunity, we essentially killed all the noise and just double down or triple down on one project, which is GoIBibo, which we were investing $100, we were now suddenly investing only $2. We also actually moved out of the office, which is the same building which Helion also occupied, and went into some kind of a backyard. Even when we were developing GoIBibo, at that time we decided that, and of course all the other travel players were very distracted because they were coming off a larger base, we were coming off ground zero. And even when we were developing GoIBibo, we decided that we will only focus on domestic air ticketing. We will not do any call centers. We will keep our fixed cost structure very low. We had a team of, we had receded down to a team of about 10 people. And this project was not even sponsored by our investors. They didn't even know. Only after running this in and running through the dark clouds did the platform started to emerge and started to grow, and it got its backing. But I think at that moment of time, it was clearly the most important aspect was survival and to make those choices and make those hard choices. On one hand, we didn't know whether what is today the popular IBibo is going to survive. Also, tough decisions, essentially kill what was not required and just focus and double down on very few things to be done. So
Got
yeah,
it.
it was all of it was emergent, and at the same time, I think what worked at that moment in time was quick decision, doing things really fast, and going behind things and putting more water into the seeds which are working.
Got it. Thank you so much, Ashish. Thank you. Pankaj, I'm actually curious to know your perspective because you had actually started the business actually a few years before probably even IB was started. So I'm assuming that you probably had maybe a slightly larger team. How did your business get impacted at the time 2008 happened?
Yeah, thank you, Alok. Thank you, everyone. Friends, the whole, can you hear me well?
Yes.
So the whole idea or thought at that time that we should just pass through this whole maze. Uh, I had witnessed 2008, but I had witnessed 1930 this World War, and I'm given to understand that COVID is more complex than all of it together. So at that time, if I read that, we had a fairly largest team in the sense we were, and amongst them, first thing we did is we almost burnt out all the funding that we had. We were running like zero, and I'm going to be out. We have those of you wish can leave. I remember 3 people left, and all others continued. So rest one more continued.
Wow.
He said that we will continue. And that's the reality. We will try and help you get jobs. Sure up because I was HR director in HR community. And that's how the journey began. Second critical thing that happened is we converted some of the top members into contractual employees. And that saved a lot of headache and heartburns there. Within that, we corrected something at the top. We had hired a lot of senior people from the competition. That's the learning that we had that probably startup. Thirdly, we spoke to a few VCs, and we gave them an offer that, okay, give us a target if you, after 4 months, you're going to invest. They gave us a target, and we said we'll come back to you. Of course, we got lesser valuation that we wanted, but I think the old lesson that valuation is normal, but lack of funding is terminal. That kept echoing in our dilution is normal. Let's not worry about, but lack of funding can be terminal. And on that basis, we started. Third thing that happened is we got a meeting. We got 10 minutes and we ended up spending with him 40-45 minutes. The critical part was not that meeting, but the positive conversation it flowed in. Reliance gave us a project which was a fairly large project, and we could deliver it well. We implemented it fairly well, and that created a positive news in the market. So that's the positive stroke we wanted. That's the third thing happened. And fourth thing is that because we had leaned ourselves, the structure became much thinner. We decided that we'll start building our product. By that time, we just kept debating, should we or should we not? So I think those four things helped us that we somehow connect. Now it sounds good, but in good ways, I want to.
Got it. No, Pankaj, that's a fantastic story. And you referred to one of the lessons from 2008, which is most important thing is having cash in the bank. And I want to move to Pete. Pete, you have been a global executive, worked across geographies, and I'm sure that the memories of 2008 are still very vivid. Any lessons that you learned from those times that you think might be applicable today as well for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, and I think it's very dependent on the company you're at. So I'll speak to Druva first. I came on to Druva after the 2008 crisis, but I've been with the company for a long time, and I'm quite familiar with with our history and strategy. So it really depends on the phase of the company. Druva was very early in its life cycle at the time. So Druva was really just getting started, trying to find its niche, developing its products, and it hadn't even yet really brought to market the product that we're selling today at the company. So to be honest, the credit crunch of 2008 did not, have a major effect on Druva because we didn't have a lot of existing business. Now, does it certainly delay the opportunity to grow? Yes, but the risks are much less at that time, and it's easier to adjust. But when we looked back, so there were actually some opportunities that came out of that, right? Because when you're in those situations, sometimes smaller companies can be in an advantage because you don't have as many things that you have to fix and you have to deal with. So that can sometimes be an opportunity. Constraints focus the mind and provide a fertile ground for creativity. And one of the opportunities we also saw as a company, because we were shifting to a subscription business, was companies were also looking for a way to switch from CapEx to OpEx. So that actually provided an opportunity for Druva's business model. So I think it really depends from company to company, but there are times like this where opportunities can present themselves.
Fantastic point. No, Pete, that is an excellent point. If I may chime in, I used to be working with SAP in India at that point, and we were running a days sales outstanding DSO of more than a year. Essentially, we were writing contracts but not collecting cash. And we realized at that point that cash is king, and we made some changes to our DSO policy. And the cash collection cycle went down to 1/5, and it has remained same thereafter, or at least until I left, I know. So some of these opportunities do create some of these situations create the opportunities actually to change business processes that may actually turn out to be for the long-term good of the company. So let me shift focus. Enough of 2008, clearly. As at least as a VC, as we are talking to our portfolio companies, everybody is taking a relook at their operating plan. And as you can imagine, that operating plan has a revenue side of it, that has a cost side of it. And part of figuring out what's going to happen to your company is to figure out what's going to happen to your top line. So different founders are reacting differently. They're saying, oh, I grew 5x last year. Maybe I'll grow 3x this year. Some guys are saying, no, guys, life is tough. It's going to be pretty bad. Maybe I'm just going to be flat this year. So we are finding that, of course, it depends on the industry. But even despite that factor, we are finding different levels of optimism and pessimism between founders in terms of how to figure out the impact on their top line, not knowing what this crisis is truly going to be. So maybe let me go back to Pankaj first this time, and to say, if you are in their shoes, how would you be assessing the impact for the business that folks are running? What would be your advice?
One thing is, I'm clear that our treatment can't be more painful than the disease. I can't build a solution that will just remain painful eternally. People will follow it, right? So the first thing we'll have to look at it that we do it in a very structured. So I will take a graded approach. Graded approach, I'll take it, which is over the cost, not revenue. So once I take a graded approach and I say this is my base case cost, and then I build my plan on top of it, which means necessarily that for 18 months I need this much of cash, this much. This is how my structure will look like. This is how I will survive. If things turn out to be better, I keep investing better, but I will not touch 18 months plan unless this. So my approach is going to be very base plan kind of an approach. Second thing, I'm going to make sure that somehow I will look at and spend time on product. Most of the time, our product is guided by either new customers or existing customers. Can we make sure that we focus on our product roadmap, which makes us leaner and smarter, but it always takes a backseat. So most of the tech companies will relate to that approach. These are the two very prominent things I would recommend. I can get into details if you want.
Got it. So just maybe to reiterate, you're saying that you will take an 18-month approach, make sure that there is at least enough runway for 18 months, and that baseline plan you don't want to touch. If there are positive surprises on top of it, yes, you will take incremental approaches on top of it, but that you don't want to disturb. Ashish, I mean, you are a founder now, you are a founder then. How would you think about this situation, and would you have a similar thought process?
Yeah, I think if I were to look at it at a more generic level, then Darwin's theory is, I think, the most important, which is survival of the fittest. So I would really look at surviving as the most important metric right now. Whatever it takes, find ways for companies to survive. Now we, the company, of course, are in an interesting situation that we're well capitalized, backed by Tiger, Steady, Dragon Egg, a couple of investors. But having said that, we too would constantly watch every penny that we spend. We would also question the status quo. This is a great time for us to reflect and say that we, improve our services in a particular way. Can we optimize our spends? But I think at a generic level, the single word that I would use with everyone is what will, because I think the ones which will survive this crisis have very high probability of winning, because we will see a lot of destruction, we will see a lot of deaths of not just startups but even established companies. This is, I think, also an opportunity for them to survive, can challenge the order of established players. Look what, for example, in I mean, I think it's a great opening. New travel startups, great opening. Many players in various categories come up. So that's really, I would use a single word. What will it take to survive?
Got it. Pete, let me take a slightly contrarian question to what Pankaj and Ashish are talking about, which is, I am speaking to certain founders who are saying, you know, what if we end up reacting too much? Would that mean that if the crisis actually does not last as long, it gets over, I'm actually not in a position to capitalize because I will need to rehire people, I will need to ramp them up again, and guess what? I'm going to lose those 3 to 6 months in that process, and others might actually surge ahead in that time frame. How would you sort of answer their concern?
Yeah, so let me start with the short answer. I think it's too early to know how this is going to play out. So, and I think one of our key investors, Sequoia, and I think they're on one of the later panels. They shared a very good, poignant letter to the leadership, and they referred to this event as a black swan moment. And it took me a little while to really understand what that meant. But the more I looked into it, makes a lot of sense. And and I think it's important to understand what is a black swan moment, right? These are events like 2001, 2008, where, it's something we never could have expected, and it's something we can't rationalize. With the benefit of hindsight, if we go out 2 years from now, we'll look at this and we'll say, yes, this could have been expected. This can be predicted, and we'll have a better idea how to handle it. But this is the first time we're running into a case exactly like this, right? And if we look at previous cases, they were different, and the way they manifested was different. 2008 ended up, with a credit crisis. This is not that. This is going to really affect productivity of everybody, because everybody has switched from a work from home. So what I'd say right now is we don't really know how long this is going to last. So we're not yet at the point where we can make a complete decision on that, but we actually have bounds on that, right? And we could look. I think what we could say right now is best case scenario is that we'll see weakness for the next 6 months with a pretty sharp rebound. But I think we also have to say, based on what we know, this could actually last longer until there's a vaccine. We could have a weak economic environment for 18 months, which is going to have ripple effects and can actually last longer. So I think we have to act now based on what we know, which is not a defined amount of time. So I think to some of the decisions that we make now, we may have to adjust a month from now, and we have to keep an eye on those key factors. So certain things we're absolutely going to know. So we have to look at where there's exposure. We sell to all markets, and we know that travel and recreation industry is going to be heavily hit, and it's going to be heavily hit for a long time. So we have to expect that there's going to be a decline in that, and we have to also expect that there's going to be some decline in the overall economic conditions. So that's a given. Now, how much, we don't know. So I think we have to make some initial steps on that, adjustments to our cash spending, how we market, our headcount. But I think 3 weeks, 4 weeks from now, we got to be very careful and listen to the market and be ready to make further adjustments at that time. And yes, there's going to be a worry. You don't want to overreact too quickly, because you might need those resources 4 months from now. So some things you should hold that decision. But there is information you have now, and I think the companies that are going to do the best are the ones that are going to be realistic and act quickly and make those decisions quickly. I think that's very important.
Alok, there's a point here you make.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Very quick. There is something called OODA loop, right, which is being discussed a lot, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. It's like a loop you put in. So whatever cost plan you make, just put OODA loop on it. So observe, orient, decide, and act. Observe, orient, decide, and act. It's a loop that you practice on whatever cost plan you build for 6 months, 3 months, 1 year, 2 years. That's what we are trying to do, but I'm just making a point if that helps on.
Got it. Maybe one last question for Ashish, and we are going to take one or two questions from the audience as well. Ashish, I think at least all three of you happen to be in businesses, which I would argue are relatively virtual businesses. A lot of what you do actually can be done on phone, on the internet, etc., remotely. There are lots of founders who have physical businesses, whether that happens to be mobility, whether that happens to be logistics, e-commerce, where there's a very strong physical component to it. And in their cases, they are dealing not just with demand challenges, they're actually just they are actually being hampered by execution challenges on the ground. Any advice which would be different for these kinds of founders?
It's a tough one, firstly, but my sense on the topic is that they got to work with the authorities. What we have seen nicely is that a lot of companies which are doing last mile delivery are working with the authorities. For example, in the NCR region, Basket and Zomato and Swiggy, etc., were banned, and there was just an order which came out yesterday that the authorities have agreed for them to, do last mile delivery. So I guess they have to work with the authorities, articulate the problem statement, and at the same time the opportunity, which would be very, very important. They need to come together at this stage. So I think each of these guys would be in certain categories. So they need to not they need to co-opt at this stage. They need to come together as a sector. So for example, if there is a company that has which competes on a particular category and has supply chain constraints, it needs to come together with its other competitors to solve the problem. Yeah, I mean, it'll have to use a lot of creative ways of doing it. I don't think the answer is that stop the show. We need to find a way for how does the show must go on, even if it's not 100% optimal, even if it's 50%, or even if it's suboptimal. I think that's how I would really think about it. I haven't faced a situation because never had an offline element of a business, but these are some initial thoughts.
Got it. We will take one question from the audience, and I don't know how much more time we have. This is a question from Mitul Kumar Mehta, and the question is, what are the key parameters to adapt, upskill, and stay relevant? Can you highlight some of the common points? I'll actually leave it to the panelists if anyone wants to raise up their hand and go for the question, which is, what are the key parameters to adapt, upskill, and stay relevant in these times? Are there some common points?
So my take here is that there are three things. One is your productivity. What is that you can continue to do that productivity remains relevant and managed? So for instance, at our end, we use our own product called Zippy, through which we are able to manage tasks. So it sounds very small, but can we manage tasks for an employee or workforce? We are actually offering it free to our customers because we wanted that task management will become the key, which is collaborative and visible to everyone. With 1,000 employees, all should be able to know what's happening. That's one element, which is productivity cuts across whichever. Second, whatever your key metric is. For instance, most of the tech companies look at either DAU or MAU as matrices. But I think in these times, constant communication with the buyer, probably become buyer and CXU in mid layers. And third, I will say metrics, which is around cash. You can predict cash would not burn per track, which is financial metric.
Got it. Got it. Let me take another question which has come from the audience, and I'm just going to read it out that I'm getting on WhatsApp, which is that there are founders who have raised $500,000 and figured that they will raise the next round either by the end of the year or in 2021. And the question is, how is the fundraising situation going to change either by the end of the year or in 2021? Ashish, do you want to take that?
Sure. So, I want to repeat like a parrot. Anyone with $500,000, find a way. And if let's say that money was to last him or her or that company 6 months, expand that runway by 3 times. So that's the first thing. So survival of the fittest, right? Darwin in this situation is like God. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, I think even though on the front end there is this whole word about that, we are still in business, but I guess the investment into the company will get extended by a longer time. The checks, like the way we were seeing before the crisis. So I think these companies need to prepare for winter.
I will maybe chime in to that question, also to what Ashish said, and I'll actually echo again what Pankaj had talked about. I don't think you should plan that there is funding available for 18 months. If there is, that's a positive side, and again, you can do more. But you do need to plan for your business, saying that what if there is no funding for 18 months? What do I do? And I think Ashish also said that survival is the biggest priority at this point in time. So I would actually rethink the operating plan to go in that direction. I'm trying to read questions and I'm getting sort of a barrage of these on my WhatsApp.
Will you read the question?
Okay, I'm going to
Out keeping the neck out for an option until you get lucky. Very important. So, is there a possibility to go back to your current investor? I'm realizing most of the companies who are in this situation, only their existing are coming to stay.
That's a very fair point, Pankaj. That's a very fair point. There is a question from Kalpana, and I'm going to just read it out without having filtered it in the past, which is, what should be the only best reason to let go a team member or a resource in a small startup? And are building a product, let's just, the second line is actually not very clear. So let's just answer the first question. What can be the only best reason to let a team member or resource go in a small startup? Pete, you want to go for it?
Yeah, I'll take that. And this is some of the hardest things. And I'll be honest, we as a company are also taking a look at that. I think we are more fortunate than other companies because we're in an industry that's very relevant because we are cloud first. But I won't go into that. But yeah, when we look at number one thing, we do have to worry about the safety and well-being of employees. But at the same time, what do we mean by well-being? If we have to let somebody go, are we being conscious of their well-being? This could be certainly some hardship. So I think we have to go back to the other point is, we're a startup too. We are potentially looking to IPO in the next year. We have to expect and we have to prepare ourselves that it's not going to be favorable to do that or possible to do that for the next 18 months or longer. So we have to make our cash last. So we do have to take a hard look at our business. We have to take a look at the staff. And I think the first thing that you do is, number one, address the non-performance. Right. I think in the previous market, sometimes it was very hard to hire, and sometimes you took a long time to address those non-performers. And I think you have to look at that first, but you still might have to make deeper cuts as a company. And I think the way you have to look at that is you have to look at the long-term longevity of the company. You may have to make some hard choices now, and if you don't make those hard choices now and make your cash last, you're going to have to make a bad choice. You're going to have to make a difficult choice for the whole company. So you'll affect many more lives that way. So those are some of the practical and realistic things you have to look at as a leader or as a founder of your company.
Got it. Thank you, Pete. There are a couple of questions coming to me on WhatsApp, which I'm going to combine and rephrase slightly differently. And these are I guess, a little bit more relevant on the enterprise side, but might be equally true on the consumer side. That in general, in these times, one of the biggest priorities is to keep the existing customers because they are actually already paying customers for you. At the same time, many of them want to renegotiate the payment terms. Many of them actually want to renegotiate the pricing itself. And they're asking for it not because they're bad guys, but they're asking for it because they need to survive as well. At the same time, you need to survive as well. How do you react to these requests or demands, if I may use the word, from your existing customers?
So I think first is, as I shared, that there is a three-tier engagement required at the time. You have to know what your user is saying, what your middle buyer is saying, and when your buyer CX, get that right. So we need to get the perspective of all the three built. So these are the three levels that are looked at it. Secondly, do you have a product which is relevant to this? So we need to go back to customers and help them again improving the productivity. If it is not improving the critical parameter, it will not happen. Third, offering because your travel costs come down, your infra comes down, so customers will. So I think be ready to share forms, go back to AWS, take their help and check the whole crowd info. You can be even more smart, more their customers. I think these are the
Got it. Would that be very different in a consumer business, Ashish?
Sorry, I'm unable to hear.
I mean, in terms of,
if you could.
I was saying that if it's a consumer business, would you imagine that your existing customers become your highest priority? And if so, do you believe that they will be making a lot of demands for renegotiation of the terms? What would you do to keep them at this point?
Yeah, I think so. Firstly, in consumer businesses, there aren't customized contracts. But having said that, in a consumer business, my top priority would be to engage most with my current consumers rather than starting to acquire more. I would use this opportunity to ensure that my churn is minimized and the engagement and activity level metrics with my current users are maximized. So that's I would really go and in fact over service the current user base rather than getting aggressive about acquiring a lot of users. And great time for us and ensure that we are honest to ourselves and we get our and in some cases the DAO metric and the MAU metric right. Right? When you're in momentum, you're under pressure. You're under pressure. Forget about the metric, and then it's too late for you to keep metric. I would really this time improve my core metric, which is conversion rate, etc.
So maybe I'm actually going to bring this to a close. But before doing so, number one, I want to thank all the panelists and also AWS and YourStory for giving us the opportunity. And again, want to emphasize again that, look, we do empathize with all the founders out there. I know that some of you are in a luckier situation where you have sufficient cash in the bank or have the scale to be able to ride out this crisis. For some of you, this might be actually much more difficult times. But as they say that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, I'm sure many of you are going to come out of this looking back at actually some of the biggest learning opportunities you've had in your career. So thank you again. And with that, we'll sign off from this panel.